From translation, Net New English Translation. This 36th day of the year. Today we are reading passages Leviticus 14 to 15. Leviticus chapter 14, verses 1 to 57. The Lord spoke to Moses. This is the law of the diseased person on the day of his purification, when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine the infection. If the infection of the diseased person has been healed, then the priest will command that 2 live clean birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop be taken up for the one being cleansed. The priest will then command that one of the birds be slaughtered into a clay vessel over fresh water. Then he is to take the live bird along with the piece of cedar wood, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the twigs of hyssop, and he is to dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird slaughtered over the fresh water, and sprinkle it 7 times on the one being cleansed from the disease, pronounce him clean, and send the live bird away over the open countryside. The one being cleansed must then wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water, and so be clean. Then afterward he may enter the camp, but he must live outside his tent 7 days. When the 7th day comes he must shave all his hair, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, all his hair, and he must wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and so be clean. On the 8th day he must take 2 male lambs without defect, and 1 ewe lamb a year old without defect, and 3/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour as a grain offering mixed with olive oil, and 1 log of olive oil. Then the priest who pronounces him clean will have the one who is being cleansed stand along with these offerings before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. The priest is to take 1 male lamb and present it for a guilt offering along with the log of olive oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb in the place where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered, in the sanctuary, because like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. Then the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest is then to take some of the log of olive oil, and pour it into his own left palm. Then the priest is to dip his right finger into the olive oil that is in his left palm, and sprinkle some of the olive oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest is then to put some of the olive oil that remains in his palm on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the olive oil that is in the priest's palm he is to put on the head of the one being cleansed. So the priest will make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest is to offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed from his impurity. Afterward he is to slaughter the burnt offering, and the priest is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. So the priest will make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor, however, and cannot afford these offerings, he is to take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering for a wave offering to make atonement for him, and 1/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, and a log of olive oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, whichever he can afford. One is for a sin offering, and the other is for a burnt offering. On the 8th day he must bring them for his purification to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent before the Lord. The priest is to take the male lamb for the guilt offering and the log of olive oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb for the guilt offering. The priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest is to pour some of the olive oil into his own left palm. The priest is to sprinkle some of the olive oil with his right finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest is to put some of the olive oil in his palm on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place where the blood of the guilt offering was placed. The rest of the olive oil that is in the priest's palm he is to put on the head of the one being cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. Then he is to offer one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, whichever he can afford, one of which is for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, along with a grain offering. So the priest will make atonement before the Lord for the one being cleansed. This is the law of the one in whom there is a skin disease infection, who cannot afford the offering for his purification. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am about to give to you as a possession, and I put a diseased infection in a house in the land you are to possess, the owner of the house must come and declare to the priest, "Something like an infection has appeared in my house." The priest will then command that the house be cleared before the priest enters to examine the infection, so that everything in the house does not become unclean. And afterward the priest will enter to examine the house. He is to examine the infection, and if the infection in the walls of the house consists of yellowish green or reddish depressions, and appears deeper than the surface of the wall, then the priest is to go out of the house to the doorway of the house and quarantine the house for 7 days. The priest must return on the 7th day and examine it, and if the infection has spread in the walls of the house, then the priest is to command that the stones that had the infection in them be pulled and thrown outside the city into an unclean place. Then he is to have the inside of the house scraped all around, and the plaster which is scraped off dumped outside the city into an unclean place. They are then to take other stones and replace those stones, and he is to take other plaster and replaster the house. If the infection returns and breaks out in the house after he has pulled out the stones and has scraped the house, and after it has been replastered, then the priest is to come and examine it, and if the infection has spread in the house, it is a malignant disease in the house. It is unclean. He must tear down the house, its stones, its wood, and all the plaster of the house, and bring all of it outside the city to an unclean place. Anyone who enters the house all the days that it is quarantined becomes unclean until evening. Anyone who lies down in the house must wash his clothes. Anyone who eats in the house must wash his clothes. If, however, the priest enters and examines it, and the infection has not spread in the house after the house has been replastered, then the priest is to pronounce the house clean, because the infection has been healed. To purify the house he is to take 2 birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop. He is to slaughter 1 bird into a clay vessel over fresh water. Then he is to take the piece of cedar wood, the twigs of hyssop, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and in the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. So he is to purify the house with the blood of the bird, and the fresh water, and the live bird, and the piece of cedar wood, and the twigs of hyssop, and the scrap of crimson fabric. He is to send the live bird away outside the city into the open countryside. So he is to make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for any skin disease infection, for scall, for the diseased garment, and for a house, for a swelling, for a scab, and for a bright spot, to teach when something is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law for skin disease infections. Leviticus chapter 15, verses 1 to 33. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. Now this is how his discharge will make him unclean. His discharge makes his body unclean, whether his body flows with his discharge, or his body stops up his discharge. It makes him unclean. Any bed on which the man with the discharge lies will be unclean, and any furniture on which he sits will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. The one who sits on the furniture on which the man with the discharge sat must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. The one who touches the body of the man with the discharge must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on a person who is clean, that person must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any means of saddle on which the man with the discharge rides will be unclean. Anyone who touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening, and the one who carries these things must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone whom the man with the discharge touches without rinsing his hands with water must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. A clay vessel that the man with the discharge touches must be broken, and any wooden utensil must be rinsed with water. When the man with the discharge becomes clean from his discharge, he is to count off for himself 7 days for his purification, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in fresh water, and be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and he must come before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent and give them to the priest. The priest is to offer them, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest is to make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the man with the discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. Any garment or leather on which there is an emission of semen must be washed with water and be unclean until evening. When a man lies with a woman and has an emission of semen, they must bathe in water and be unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge of blood from her body, her impurity will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Anything she lies on during her impurity will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches any furniture she sits on must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If it is on the bed or on the furniture on which she sits, when he touches it he will be unclean until evening. If a man lies with her and her impurity touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days, and any bed on which he lies will be unclean. When a woman's discharge of blood flows for many days that are not the time of her impurity, or when the discharge flows beyond the time of her impurity, Throughout the time of her unclean discharge, she will be unclean just as in the days of her impurity. Any bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge will be to her like the bed of her impurity. Any furniture on which she sits will be unclean like the impurity of her menstrual period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. When she becomes clean from her discharge, she is to count for herself 7 days, and after that she will be clean. On the 8th day she must take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent. The priest is to offer one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest is to make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the woman who has a discharge of impurity. Thus you are to set the Israelites apart from their impurity, so that they do not die in their impurity, by defiling my tabernacle which is in their midst. This is the law of the one with a discharge: the man who has an emission of semen and becomes unclean by it, the woman who has a discharge during her menstrual period, the man or woman with a discharge, and the man who lies with an unclean woman.